go west, young man, but bring water and an AC. USA's water supply in crisis mode. New federal holiday for USA, a hollow meme or a hollow gesture. FCC's new mapping tool promises a broadband internet in every pot. Myanmar unrest, big trouble ahead in Asia, or just smoke and rumors? Is China's Taishan nuclear plant of Fukushima in waiting? Dr. Dre launches innovative new high school in South Los Angeles, and France gives the US a mini Lady Liberty. Now we have a set. The corporatocracy turns up the heat as the planet gets hotter, but it's all cool and factual in this change of season installment of the Balanced Reality Report. The National Weather Service says 40 million people in the western USA are under heat advisory or heat warning due to excessive heat. Last Wednesday, the city of Phoenix, Arizona reached 115 degrees with expectations to reach 117 degrees by that Friday. The record for Wednesday had been set at 115 degrees back in 1974. The temps are so dangerously high that cities like Livermore, California have set up cooling centers for the houseless or homeless. The extreme heat is expected to continue in California, Arizona, and Texas, but other states are also expected to feel the heat wave. Here's a report from the big footprint NBC News on the heat wave.
Tonight, record-breaking heat and a lack of rainfall are threatening to paralyze the country's western half. There's Phoenix, set to blister its records. But the high heat will reach beyond the desert this week. Billings, Montana, forecasting 104 degrees. Casper, Wyoming, 102. Salt Lake City, 103. Grand Junction, 106. As parts of California hit triple digits, the heat could be felt in the kitchen as farmers suffer to produce.
If we don't have enough water and we don't have enough feed for these cows, the tough decisions are coming for all of us.
But there is no rain on the calendar, punishing the already dry, parched land.
This year is the worst drought, the worst year since 1977.
88% of it now in a drought, raising fears of widespread wildfires. Flames already burning in Utah, prompting the governor to ask his state to pray for water from the skies.
We need it now. We need some divine intervention.
The thirst for water evident at Lake Mead, at its lowest point since 1937. And in the Nevada mountains, even bighorn sheep are desperate.
We did see some mortalities on the mountains, and those mortalities were where they would normally find water, and there wasn't any.
Tucson is moving its outdoor COVID vaccination sites indoors as cities brace for earlier, hotter summers.
Definitely in the future and decades to come, we'll see probably more intense heat events like this.
And there is heightened concern about the American West power supply. Last summer, 800,000 California homes lost electricity. Now the state's power grid operator warns it may be overstressed again, adding blackouts to the list of potential dangers this summer.
It's just scorching. How long is this heat wave expected to last, Vaughn?
Kate, heat advisories are in effect through at least this Saturday here. Usually June's, they're cloudier, they're cooler, but this year, summer's coming early. Kate?
Where there's high heat, there's usually very little water. If the ancient mariner were alive, he'd probably recite water, water, sadly not everywhere. Allegedly because the planet is heating up due to people activities. So they say. When you or I have a high temperature, it's called a fever. Heat is a sign of fever, among other indicators. But fever or heat is also one way to slow down production, as well as slow the proliferation of invasive pathogens. Is this so-called planetary warming just a byproduct of colonialism, population discombobulation, or arrogant neglect? Or maybe it's all vanity. The plane is getting hotter because that's what it does just before a major cleanse. The signs are clear and it has nothing to do with alleged climate change. Climates were designed by the originator creator to change naturally, not by artificial means. The signs are clear. We are witnessing the commercialization of fresh water. Turning fresh water into a commodity requires artificial manipulation and control. One of the oldest forms of water control and manipulation was poisoning of a rival group's water well. Other ways included placing a putrefying carcass strategically out of sight upstream to defile the water for the people downstream. A lake can become a meadow over time if certain factors are present, but all it takes is a decade or less to dry up due to waste dumping. The evidence is evident. You contaminate one person's drinking water, you contaminate yours too. The popular meme today is climate change. Before that, global warming. Before that, global cooling. Lake Mead, a man-made reservoir formed after the damming of the Colorado River in Nevada, USA, is drying up, so they claim. But what is the real reason? Can you detect which climate marketing meme is used in this CBS report? Take a listen.
This morning, our series Eye on Earth looks at the punishing drought gripping much of the western U.S. Scientists are calling it a mega drought brought on by climate change. Now look at this map. The latest U.S. Drought Monitor map shows large areas of the Southwest are exceptionally dry. That's never good. The worst category is taking a dramatic toll on the Colorado River system that provides water to 40 million people in 7 different states. CBS News senior environmental correspondent, that's Ben Tracy, traveled to the iconic Hoover Dam and shows us how the federal government may be forced to make a drastic and historic decision.
I mean, it's amazing to see it up close.
For more than 8 decades, the Hoover Dam has relied on water from Nevada's Lake Mead to cover up its backside. But now at age 85, it finds itself uncomfortably exposed. Much of the water the dam is supposed to be holding back is gone.
This is like a different world.
Pat Mulroy is the former head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. She says Lake Mead, the nation's largest reservoir, is on track to soon hit its lowest level ever recorded. This part of the Colorado River system is a crucial water supply for Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Southern California. It makes the vast agricultural land of the desert Southwest possible.
This landscape screams problems to me. I mean, just look at the bathtub rings. To me, that is an enormous wake-up call.
Lake Mead is at just 37% of its capacity. It hasn't been full since back in 2000 when the water came right up to the top of Hoover Dam. This is what it looks like now.
Since 2000, Lake Mead has dropped 130 feet. That's hard to imagine, but picture a 13-story building on top of my head, and way up there, that's where the water used to be. So you and I talked here back in 2014.
We
and
did.
At that time, I asked you, how critical a point are we at?
It's a pretty critical point.
If you look at 30 feet lower now, what point are we at?
We're at a tipping point. It's an existential issue for Arizona, for California, for Nevada. It is just that simple.
For the first time ever, the federal government is expected to declare a water shortage on the lower Colorado River later this summer. That will force automatic cuts to the water supply for Nevada and Arizona starting in 2022. Homeowners have higher priority and at first won't feel the pain as badly as farmers.
If we don't have irrigation water, we can't farm.
Dan Thielander is a second-generation family farmer in Arizona's Pinal County. The water to grow his corn and alfalfa fields comes from Lake Mead.
So next year, we're going to get about 25% less water. Means we're going to have to fallow or not plant 25% of our land.
In 2023, Thielander and other farmers in this part of Arizona are expected to lose nearly all of their water from Lake Mead. So they're rushing to dig wells to pump groundwater to try to save their farms.
The future here, honestly, I hate to say it, but it's pretty cloudy.
This is an engineering marvel for sure.
Back at Hoover Dam, facility manager Mark Cook has his own concerns. Lake Mead has dropped so much that it's cut the dam's hydropower output by nearly 25%.
So these are generating the electricity, these things?
Yep, exactly.
He wanted to show us the new turbine blades they just installed.
So right below us right here is that brand new turbine.
Designed to keep the power flowing efficiently at rapidly dropping lake levels. At some point, the dam could stop producing electricity altogether.
Our previous number was at elevation 1050, and now we've lowered that number to 950, so we bought ourselves 100 feet.
All those islands were underwater?
Completely submerged.
Pat Mulroy says a rapidly retreating reservoir may be the new normal. and the millions of people who rely on this water supply will have to quickly learn to live with less of it.
We don't change unless we absolutely have to. Well, when you look out at this lake, I think that moment of it's absolutely necessary has arrived.
For CBS This Morning, Ben Tracy, Lake Mead, Nevada.
Wow, that is an alarming outlook from Pat Mulroy there. A tipping point, she said.
Yeah, I think the days are upon us to pray for rain.
Yes.
In the west there.
The U.S. has a new holiday. It's called Juneteenth. Is this new Juneteenth federal holiday an example of an empty gesture from the Biden administration? Or is the new Juneteenth Holiday Executive Act Biden's way of saying to Aboriginals, don't say I never gave you anything? Or as Biden himself would say, don't say I never gave y'all nothing. Or is this act just an intelligence-insulting diversion away from the multitude of real issues concerning Aboriginal Americans and all Americans? The Biden administration, along with both House and Senate, want Aboriginals to be happily satisfied with the signing of this symbolic piece of legislation. Listen closely to this CBS Evening News report to detect what is really at play here.
Beginning tomorrow, Americans will get to celebrate a brand new federal holiday, Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery. CBS's Nancy Cordes has more on the importance of the day and the woman most responsible for getting it recognized.
With the stroke of a pen today, Juneteenth became the first new federal holiday since Martin Luther King Day in 1983.
Happy Juneteenth, everybody.
June 19th, 1865 was the day a Union general arrived in Galveston, Texas to inform enslaved people they were free. 2 months after the end of the Civil War and 2 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation.
So think about that. For more than 2 years, the enslaved people of Texas were kept in servitude.
94-year-old Opal Lee has been working to make Juneteenth a national holiday for decades. 5 years ago, she walked from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C. to urge Congress to act. This week, she finally got her wish.
The bill is passed.
You are an incredible woman, Ms. Opal. You really are.
Opal Lee had a front row seat to history today, as President Biden said signing the bipartisan bill would go down as one of the greatest honors of his presidency.
By making Juneteenth a federal holiday, all Americans can feel the power of this day and learn from our history and celebrate progress and grapple with the distance we've come, but the distance we have to travel, Jim.
June 19th is on Saturday, so the federal government is treating tomorrow, Friday, as a holiday instead and giving many federal workers the day off. Though we just heard from the Postal Service, Nora, that it can't implement those changes so quickly and cease operations on Friday and Saturday, so post offices will remain open this year.
Well, Opal Lee proving you can make a difference even in your 90s. Nancy Cordes, thank you.
The CBS female reporter stated matter-of-factly at the opening of the report that, quote, Americans will get to celebrate a new federal holiday, Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery, unquote. That's totally incorrect. Fact is, Juneteenth does not represent the end of slavery in America, as the CBS reporter and others often erroneously report. Truth is, it specifically pertained to the end of slavery in Texas. Meanwhile, slavery continued to thrive in several border states that were not affected by the Emancipation Proclamation. Delaware was the last to free its nearly 2,000 prisoners of war, aka so-called slaves, on December 6, 1865, 6 months after Texas. Shouldn't Biden or his people who write his speeches have known about this important detail? After all, Biden was Delaware State Senator from 1972 to 2008. That's ample time to brush up on Delaware history. For the record, the New York Times 1619 Project is another propaganda agenda, like the TV series Roots. Allegedly, the 1619 Project is a social project developed by New York Times reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones and several other New York Times reporters. Just like the date cited for June 19th or Juneteenth, The 1619 Project also falls short of being factual. Allegedly, the first so-called enslaved Aboriginals were brought to St. Augustine, Florida in 1565. Also, did you notice how the female CBS reporter vocally overemphasized Juneteenth advocate Opal Lee's gender as female? The outright inclusion or subtle injection of feminism or multiculturalism is a common social engineering tactic done by popular media, so-called leftist activists, politicians, and so-called African American academics when the topic is Aboriginal social issues. Often there is also a negative stab at the Aboriginal male who is often degraded or spoken about as if weak and unimportant or irrelevant to an issue. Did you also hear in that report the creepy, overly happy voice of Kamala Harris saying Happy Juneteenth Day? Harris is on record for saying she will do nothing specifically for Aboriginal Americans. Did she mean nothing of substance? Because a federal Juneteenth holiday law sounds like it targets Aboriginals. Harris, who misused the aphorism stated by John F. Kennedy in 1963, "A rising tide lifts all boats," stated during her presidential campaign that if elected president, any legislation she pushed or endorsed for Aboriginals would have to be inclusive of all other Americans. As an aside, an aphorism is a short or concise observation that contains a generalization of fact or truth, then turned into a quote usually made by someone famous from the past. Anyway, wasn't Biden caught on record making a slavery reference before a largely Aboriginal audience, saying, quote, "They're going to put y'all back in chains"? He later claimed he was referring to Wall Street banking. When were Wall Street bankers ever put in chains for being Wall Street bankers? Sounded like Biden may have been using threatening words, but whether his statement constituted a threat was and is up to the courts to decide, especially since such threatening rhetoric may be protected by legal precedents per U.S. Supreme Court case of Watts versus United States in 1969, where the court ruled that true threats do not include political hyperbole and joking statements. This new Juneteenth federal holiday act says to Aboriginal Americans, you can have another symbolic holiday, but the U.S. government will not enact anything that will economically enrich you as a people, nor anything that will grant you protected group status, like those anti-hate crime bills specifically protecting various other groups. But at least now there's another day to indulge in consumerism and debt slavery. But wait, there's more Biden. Last Wednesday, Biden's administration approved the release of a new publicly available mapping tool that gives the public and telecom industry planners an accurate picture of where there are dead spots, or rather areas of the U.S. where there is no broadband internet. Basically an interactive U.S. map showing who has broadband and who doesn't. The purpose for the tool? It's part of Biden's infrastructure spending agenda, which supposedly is going to bring broadband to every American. In 2019, under President Trump's administration, telecom analysts brought their findings to lawmakers in Washington. This report from NBC affiliate News 8 indicates that this issue was always on the table, but never addressed. Mind you, funding to rural areas is the focus, but an equal number of urban residents in primarily poor areas do not have access to broadband because of economics, not lacking infrastructure, though that is an issue too. Under one of Obama's stimulus recovery plans, monies were set aside for rural households to subsidize their ISP subscriptions, similar to subsidized winterizing programs. That same plan did not, however, apply to nor reach urban areas. Before going to that report, most impoverished Aboriginals and some other impoverished groups have no idea that the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, in February 2021 rolled out a broadband subsidy program which allots $50 a month to assist low-income U.S. citizens with their broadband service subscriptions. Native Americans receive $75 per month to help with monthly broadband costs. Now for that report.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle agree bridging the digital gap is a top priority. Today they heard from an expert panel who stressed that they take action before the gap causes any further damage, especially to rural America.
These areas are like a third world country. They don't have the service available.
Nearly 19 million Americans live in areas without access to high-speed internet. And in parts of rural America, nearly a quarter of homes aren't connected.
They can't thrive in this day and age. They need access to broadband so they can have access to telemedicine, telemetrics. The farmers have access to markets.
The federal government is trying to fix the problem, offering grants to companies like Dan Stelpflugs to help build networks in small communities. The problem is, according to a new Microsoft study, the FCC's current coverage maps don't count millions of Americans who don't have internet, meaning money isn't getting to some areas where it's needed most.
It's surprising, in this day and age that the mapping isn't more accurate.
At a Tuesday hearing, Stelpflug urged lawmakers and the FCC to fix coverage maps. That way, every home is counted.
We would love to have these maps be accurate and have the money available to build the infrastructure.
The FCC chairman admits the maps need work. Earlier this month, he announced an effort to try to more accurately count homes without broadband.
It's great that the FCC is aware that this is an issue, but it's not just enough to take the word for it.
Iowa Democrat Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer says if the FCC doesn't come up with a solution, Congress will.
We do have to actually take these steps to make sure that we have it in code here, how this stuff is getting done, so that states like Iowa aren't left behind.
Right now, lawmakers are debating several plans to force the FCC to change its practices before any grant money gets distributed nationwide. In Washington, Raquel Martin, back to you.
Now here's what they didn't say in those reports about those flawed and inaccurate FCC maps. These FCC maps are used to get approval for and distribute billions of dollars in federal funding, which the agency then offers to developers to subsidize the cost of building out infrastructure. Even tech news outlet CNET has indicated that the biggest issue with these FCC maps is that they do not paint an accurate picture of where broadband exists or doesn't. Most popular broadcast online media has used the excuse of the so-called pandemic shutdown for bringing attention to the fact that millions of U.S. citizens and Americans lacked access to true broadband internet at home. Fact is, millions of U.S. citizens and Americans without broadband have been complaining for years, this presenter included. According to a report by CNET, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, under the purview, meaning under the regulation of, the U.S. Commerce Department, developed the map using a combination of data from both public and private sources. The issue with the FCC's maps stems from how the data was collected. The FCC relies on self-reported information provided by internet service providers, who report coverage for so-called census blocks, or census block areas. These areas can span miles of territory, and if broadband providers report even a single home or business in a particular census block as having service, the FCC counts the entire census block as served. But that's not always the case, especially in rural communities. You may remember former President Obama's Expand Broadband's Reach, which funded the FCC's National Broadband Plan of 2010. As part of that 2009 stimulus agenda known as the American and Reinvestment Act, $8 billion was given to telecom giants like Comcast or satellite companies like HughesNet. Many satellite customers learned the hard financial way about satellite internet. It's not true broadband. The speed and the bandwidth are throttled according to plan or various plans, and so is data, often at prices double, even triple that of cable or DSL. Remote workers also learned a terrible fact, which was employers who hire remote staff do not hire applicants who have to use satellite internet connections. Was that $8 billion well spent? Obviously not. Will Biden's plan differ in any way? The Democratic scorecard for improving America's failing infrastructure says it will not. And this is not a partisan issue. It's a political corruption, no corporate accountability, responsibility to the poor and working people of the U.S. issue that an updated interactive map is probably not going to resolve. but we shall see. In the meantime, people, contact the FCC directly if you find real discrepancies in their new mapping tool. Plus, keep sticking it to the local telecom companies if they are not fulfilling their contractual promises for high-quality services. Make them justify price increases and lack of connection services if you reside in a dead spot, especially. A famous activist once said, silence equals acceptance. Well, satellite internet does not equal broadband. And now we head east to find out what went on there last week and is still going on across the vast waters in the nation of Myanmar, where the military remains in control over the economics and politics of the nation of Myanmar after a coup in April of this year. Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, went through more turmoil after the arrest and detention of self-proclaimed state councilor Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win Myint. After Myanmar allegedly gained independence, which means they made concessions with their colonizers, in this instance UK Parliament and so-called Brit Royals, political reins were handed over to the largest ethnic group, the so-called Burmese, who are actually not the Aboriginal people of the region. The military, led by General Min Aung Hlaing, is mainly supported by another ethnic minority group called the mostly Buddhist Tatmadaw. In 2020, State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi defended the military's attempt to eradicate the stateless ethnic Muslim minority group called the Rohingya people. The Rohingya and other ethnic minorities, like certain groups of Karen peoples, are, let's say, more melanated in appearance to the ethnic majority Burmese. Many people of these highly melanated groups allegedly refer to themselves as Black Karen. Nearly 800,000 Rohingya were forced into neighboring Bangladesh by the military, again at the behest of now deposed Aung Suu Kyi. You may remember when Aung San Suu Kyi gave a national speech regarding the military attack on the Rohingya people, where she showed no remorse and she showed support for the military by stating, "Genocidal intent cannot be the only hypothesis."
From shock to anger, the military coup in Myanmar has sparked public displays of outrage, with people banging pots and pans overnight in its biggest city, Yangon. 2 days after the takeover that ousted Aung San Suu Kyi and her government, calls for civil disobedience, mostly online, are growing. Doctors and nurses in at least 30 towns have gone on strike to oppose the coup, an act of defiance with potentially dangerous consequences in a country with one of South Asia's highest coronavirus death tolls. But there's still reluctance to protest openly. Some analysts say what happens over the next week could define the country's political future for years to come.
Right now, I don't know if people are planning something big, but my guess is that if we go from the past, either this happens in the next 4 or 5 days, or it'll just cool down.
Military vehicles now line the streets of major cities. In a country still adapting after years of military rule where dissidents were silenced and opponents arrested, protests carry high risks. On Wednesday morning, the government-run newspaper published a warning, urging people to not oppose the coup.
At the moment, people are buying the newspapers to know the latest, but I don't think they'll keep buying it later on, when photographs of military leaders begin to appear on the cover. Some say it's disgusting to see.
Myanmar's elected leader and head of the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi, won a landslide victory in elections in November. Following a large loss of parties favored by the military, it declared the election fraudulent. Now, the head of the army is running the country. Amid mounting international criticism, people are now wondering whether their country's brief experience of democracy has perhaps come to an end. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Ali Fowler is one of the few foreign journalists based in Myanmar. She joins us now live via Skype from Yangon. So police have filed charges against Aung San Suu Kyi and the president. What have they charged them with, Ali?
Well, Aung San Suu Kyi has been charged under the Import-Export Act for apparently being in possession of communications equipment. Now, the Import-Export Act is incredibly broadly written. It's notorious under the former military regime for creating political prisoners. And it was thought that when Aung San Suu Kyi's party came into power, they might revoke or at least reform a lot of these laws. And this is definitely one of the most notorious ones. So they're presumably kicking themselves now that they didn't prioritize that. And there were a lot of questions about why they hadn't addressed that, because it's left them vulnerable now in this situation. And the president, he's been charged under the Natural Disasters Act for breach of COVID rules. That's thought to refer to a time during the election campaign. Campaigning was officially banned because of COVID restrictions. Gatherings of more than 30 people were not allowed. And a convoy of cars and motorbikes drove past his house and he came out to greet them. So he's essentially being charged for that, which it seems faintly ridiculous. I mean, both of the charges are ridiculous, but it seems faintly ridiculous, especially in light of the last few weeks where we've seen daily protests from pro-military groups gathering in dozens or hundreds in the last few days, and without any kind of crackdown or any kind of repercussions on them. And generally, the COVID restrictions here have been widely disregarded, and there has really been no response to that. So it does seem like they're picking and choosing. They're looking for excuses. They're using these very broadly written laws or laws that aren't really enforced to try and find an excuse to keep them under remand or in custody long enough, I think, to find more against them. We heard already that they've raided the NLD offices. They're probably going to look through that sort of information. A lot of draconian laws still on the books here that can charge people for many different things. So likely they'll find something there. Also, the UEC, the Union Election Commission, which was widely criticized by the military for allegations of fraud. The military was making allegations of fraud against them. They've been disbanded. The military has already, in the last 2 days, created their own UEC, and they're now investigating fraud allegations against many NLD members. So it's likely we'll see more charges come from that as well.
Aung San Suu Kyi remains hugely popular in the country. As we heard earlier, there is a campaign of civil disobedience. How is the public likely to react to her continued detention and these charges?
Well, it's definitely going to provoke more anger. I think as the days have gone by and people have had a bit more time to digest that initial fear and anxiety here and shock has turned to sadness and now to anger and defiance, really. And that's what we're seeing today in these campaigns for civil disobedience. We've heard already about the hospital workers who are refusing to work. Their staff from government hospitals, what they're essentially saying is, we will not work under the military. And they're trying to show the military that without the people's support and cooperation, the country won't function. But it's a risky game. And it's interesting to see how this will develop. We don't know whether we'll see people coming to the streets. We know from Myanmar's military, the military in Myanmar's actions in the past, what crackdowns on popular uprisings can look like. We saw it in 2007. We saw it in 1988. They can crack down hard in violent, deadly responses to popular uprisings. So it's possible that this is a new approach, or it's possible that they're just biding their time to wait and respond when more information about what's really going to happen to Aung San Suu Kyi comes out.
Ali Fowle, reporting live there from Yangon. Ali, many thanks indeed.
You might be wondering why we did a report on Myanmar. Well, besides being an allegedly former British colony and supposed newest democracy in the region, turmoil in Myanmar has always been the catalyst for some form of major conflict in that region, whether with China or Vietnam or some other Asian nation, without fail. The problem in so-called Myanmar is very similar to unrest in other former colonized nations. The invaders are now the majorities, and they control the resources, the distribution of stolen wealth, and help maintain a tight grip on the destinies of indigenous peoples. The late author George Orwell allegedly said, quote, "We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power." And not too far away, this time in China, how convenient, there are concerns over a possible leak at Taishan nuclear plant in Guangdong province. Here's a CNN report with more.
CNN has learned that the US government is assessing reports of a possible leak at a Chinese nuclear power plant after the French company that owns part of it and operates it warned of a, quote, imminent radiological threat. Now, at the center of concern is the Taishan nuclear power plant located in Guangdong province in southern China, which is home to more than 126 million people. CNN has reached out to the Chinese authorities in Beijing and Guangdong province and the Chinese embassy in Washington. None have responded. Though this weekend, of course, is a national holiday in China, as Ivan Watson mentioned a little bit earlier. Now, while a source tells CNN the Biden administration believes the facility is not yet at a, quote, crisis level, the US has been in contact with Chinese and French governments, and multiple US government agencies are also, we understand, monitoring this situation. Well, Stephen Jiang joins me now live from Beijing. Stephen, hi. What more can you tell us about what this potentially concerning situation involves?
Robin, we have learned, CNN has learned all this information from U.S. officials in Washington. And one of the more serious allegations we have learned is the Chinese Safety Authority has been raising the acceptable limits of radiation for the area surrounding this nuclear power plant, one of the country's largest and most advanced, so to avoid having to shut it down. Now, as you mentioned, as of now, the U.S. government does not consider the situation to be at a crisis level, but they do think there's a chance this could become a disaster, which is why they were monitoring this very closely, but also that's why the National Security Council has held multiple meetings last week to discuss and address this issue. Now, the U.S. government actually became involved in this issue because of that French company, Framatome, told U.S. Department of Energy officials late last month about a potential issue at this facility. And they followed up with a memo on June 3rd, formally requesting a U.S. government waiver so that they could share American technical assistance with their Chinese partners at the facility to address this issue, which turned out to be leaking fission gas. And a few days later, on June 8th, the French company sent another memo to the DOE, really asking for an expedited review of their earlier request. But it is also in this memo that the French company used the phrase, characterized the situation as an imminent radiological threat. And it is also in this June 8th memo that they revealed that the Chinese authority has been considering raising the so-called offsite dose limits to the level that has already exceeded French standards, although we're not sure how that compares to the U.S. standards. But the French company obviously expressed concern over the potential risks to not only on-site workers, but also the general population in the surrounding area. Now, the French company has since responded to our request for comment, acknowledging they're working on a so-called performance issue in this power plant, but insisting the facility is operating within the safety parameters. As you mentioned, we have also reached out to the Chinese authorities in Beijing, in Guangdong, in Washington, as well as this Chinese company, state-owned company that co-owns and co-operates this facility. None have responded, but obviously this latest episode is undoubtedly adding another layer of complication to this already very complex and contentious relationship between Beijing and Washington, especially if this leak, the situation is not fixed anytime soon. Robin.
These days, it's very rare to hear of big entertainers doing something that benefits the average person on the street, or especially youth in need. Well, in this instance, Dr. Dre teams up with Los Angeles Unified School District to open up a school for Aboriginal and minority youth who live in disenfranchised area of South Los Angeles, California, USA. Dr. Dre Young, and his business partner, 68-year-old Jimmy Iovine, partnered with the district to create a high school that promises to promote a, quote, groundbreaking approach that combines design, business, and technology with hands-on real-world learning to help develop young leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs, unquote. Here's the BNC's Anita Bennett with more details.
Dr. Dre's new school will soon open in Lamert Park, bringing new opportunities to students in this underserved part of Los Angeles. Dr. Dre is known around the globe for his chart-topping music and his Beats headphones. Now he's giving back to help Black students move forward.
We're here strictly for the kids and trying to give them a future and something promising that maybe wasn't available before now. So that is our intent.
The hip-hop mogul and his Beats Electronics business partner, Interscope Records co-founder Jimmy Iovine, have pledged to financially back a new magnet high school in South Los Angeles. The campus will be aimed at helping students of color become leaders and entrepreneurs with a focus on the arts. It will be located alongside an existing middle school.
There are so many students leaving this area for other opportunities because we just do not offer the types of programs that they're looking for to get enthusiastic about school, such as music, sports, arts, dance.
Lamert Park is about 80% Black and a lower income part of the city. District officials admit schools in this area don't offer the same advanced curriculums as those in more affluent neighborhoods.
They're getting just the basic instruction in the basic core content area, simple electives, and they're not receiving all that well-roundedness that colleges or careers are even looking for.
That's prompted students to abandon schools here for specialized charter schools in other parts of the city. Iovine wants that to change.
One of our hopes for this school is to give kids in underserved communities the opportunity to access advanced public education.
Still, Dr. Dre expressed surprise about all the red tape involved in opening a school.
I'm still trying to learn myself and understand the politics and the hurdles that we have to get over to help. All we're here to do is help the kids.
The Los Angeles Board of Education just approved this school days ago, and it's now expected to open in the fall of 2022. Reporting from Los Angeles, I'm Anita Bennett for Start Your Day.
This all sounds like a wonderful plan, but I noticed that the reporter said the school will focus on the arts. It's not a bad thing per se, but even the spokeswoman for the school said that young people were leaving the area because schools in the area did not offer courses which got students enthusiastic about school, like sports, music, dance, and arts. And this doesn't sound very innovative. Truth be told, Dre and Iovine did not launch a school. They simply funded a school and worked within the system to somewhat alter an existing program that meets with school board so-called official approval. If this was going to be a truly dynamic, well-rounded institute of learning, then courses would focus on math, sciences, IT, health sciences, various trades, and arts, with focus on allowing students to help build their own curriculum by junior or senior year. Hands-on learning in real-world settings under real-life circumstances means actual on-site learning. Will Iovine be training juniors and seniors 20 hours per week with pay at his and other associates' businesses? Because that's what true hands-on experience is, and that's how it is gained. Acquisition learning is the best and only way to build real-world skills. Language education expert Stephen Krashen theorized in his book Explorations in Language Acquisition and Use that acquisition learning tops traditional educational models when it comes to mastering subjects. He was referring to acquiring a second language, but his acquisition theory can be applied to almost any subject and academic setting. If Dre hears this report, hopefully, Dre, you'll mandate that your school implements a truly well-rounded curricula, not just an art and sports-focused model. Aboriginal youth have been fed a false hope panacea world of entertainment for far too long. Sing and dance for your supper mindset is a hopeless one, and you should know that by now, Dre and Iovine. The arts are important, but even the arts are powered by the tech world. Give those students electives that matter and courses that can actually be used by the students themselves to create their own businesses, not just go begging for jobs. And another thing, Dre, make sure your school employs a balanced number of Aboriginal male teachers, because the terrible fact is they make up only 1.5% of all U.S. teachers, which for the most part are female. Make this school truly count, Dre. Otherwise, it's going to be just like your song, Been There, Done That. Don't let these young minds down by feeding them the same old same. This is your chance to redeem yourself, and maybe Iovine can get in on it too. The US gets another Lady Liberty from France. This time, it's a mini lady version of the big one that sits in New York's harbor.
Well, it turns out that one of the most potent symbols of American freedom began life as a Muslim woman. That's according to researchers who say that the Statue of Liberty was originally intended to represent an Egyptian peasant. The sculptor, Frederic Auguste Barthold of France, planned for his work to guard the entrance to the Suez Canal. But when he was unable to sell his idea to Egypt, Bartholdi journeyed to America with his drawings of a Muslim woman in Arab peasant garb and transformed her into a Roman goddess of liberty.
The Statue of Liberty was originally conceived as a Muslim woman, according to the Daily Beast. We all know Lady Liberty was given to the U.S. as a gift from France in 1876. But it was initially envisioned as a robed peasant woman holding a torch. The sculpture, once named Egypt Brings Light to Asia, was supposed to sit at the approach of the Suez Canal in Egypt, according to the National Park Service. But the French sculptor was unable to sell the idea to Egyptian leaders. So he sailed to America, where the Muslim woman transformed into what we know today as the Statue of Liberty.
It was a gift of the French to the slaves, and that the original statue had the picture of a black woman, the original model for it, and it had but it was Europeanized, so they carved it out in France. They had to go back to the drawing board and remodel the face after the what they call the patron saint of Manifest Destiny. So the patron saint of Manifest Destiny, that's her face on the face. In fact, you see the patron saint of Manifest Destiny in the symbol for Columbia Pictures at the beginning of the movies. That's the patron saint of Manifest Destiny.
Something that I read that was fascinating is her copper skin that he sculpted her out of is actually thinner than 2 pennies. So you look at the Statue of Liberty,
Really?
you think like it must be so heavy, which of course it is, but the actual material that he used was very supple copper that then turned brown and then became green because of the oxidation process. So she actually started out a different color. Isn't that funny?
I think that's an interesting thing because I always just assumed that the Statue of Liberty, she's green.
No, she started out like a copper penny.
She started out like a copper penny. Interesting. Noah Webster's Dictionary of 1828 defines American as noun, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. An article on CNN pushes the same old propaganda, aka lie, about the graven image called the Statue of Liberty. But the Balanced Reality Report did some digging and uncovered the real facts. But first, listen to this excerpt pulled from CNN.com regarding the new mini statue, Lady Liberty. Quote, "The replica bears the same neoclassic design as its big sister in New York, who represents the Roman goddess Libertas, and measures 151 feet tall atop the giant pedestal. She is imbued with symbolism, the crown with 7 spikes representing sun rays extending out to the world, a tablet inscribed with America's date of independence in Roman numerals, and broken chains and shackles lying at its left foot, signifying the abolition of slavery in the United States." Unquote. First, examining the term neoclassic in terms of art reveals that it is often used as a euphemism for the word iconoclasm. Iconoclasm is a concerted campaign to eradicate all so-called melanated artworks from the annals of time through obliteration, defacing, vandalism, altering and reforming, especially of artworks of religious or royal significance. The CNN article points out that these two statues are imbued with symbolism, and they both represent Roman goddess Libertas. Any goddess or god other than the Almighty, according to Bible scholars, is a demon, similar to a fallen angel. Well, this doesn't fall far from accurate, no pun intended. Classic Roman scholars claim that Libertas was borrowed from the so-called Sumerians and adopted by the Edomites, aka Romans. In so-called Sumeria, Libertas was called Ishtar, goddess of unfettered personal freedom, and consort to god Anu. For the record, unfettered personal freedom equates to do as thou wills. So, is it just a rumor that the original Lady Liberty statue was allegedly the image of an Aboriginal female? Put it like this. You don't spend nearly $500,000 and commission a team of history investigators and so-called academic experts just to dispel a rumor. Well, typically it's unheard of in matters like this. In the late 90s, the National Park Service funded an investigatory project spearheaded by lead investigator Dr. Rebecca Joseph, formerly a senior anthropologist for the National Park Service Northeast region. Findings were combined into one manuscript, completed in September of 2000. The manuscript was professionally edited several times for quote-unquote improvements and then peer-reviewed. What did the National Park Service investigation conclude? Well, according to an inquiry into the findings published on nps.gov, they will neither confirm nor deny that the original intent and design for Lady Liberty was supposed to be of an Aboriginal woman. Well, in 2017, when the Mint premiered a $100 coin, gold coin, commemorative called American Liberty, featuring the head of an Aboriginal woman as Lady Liberty. Meanwhile, on the same day in the UK, a new £1 coin allegedly representing British heritage was released. The coin featured the head of Peter Rabbit. Hares and rabbits represent or symbolize goddesses in history, specifically Ishtar, Artemis, and Aphrodite.
Today, the U.S. Mint showed us a new gold coin that depicts Lady Liberty as a black woman. American currency has always depicted her as white. The 24-karat commemorative coin will cost more than its $100 face value. It weighs an ounce, which is about $1,200 tonight. It goes on sale in April.
And with that, I now conclude this installment of the Balanced Reality Report. As always, special thanks to field and content producer Chris R., editing by A. Kanak, Balanced Reality Report theme songs by E.O. Haya, featured background music supplied by Arulo, Lily J., Alejandro Mantegna, Michael Ramir, Francisco Avelar, and of course by the kind folks at mixkit.co. Until next time and the new season, this is presenter Pharaoh. Oh, and please remember to support the report. Use of any third-party audio clip content is within compliance with the terms of fair use and the Copyright Act of 107. This report has been presented for informational and educational purposes only. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this report for purposes which go beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner.